Okay, good morning. So we're starting Siman Kuf Ayin Zayin. Dvarim haboim b'toich hasuda v'acha hasuda madinon. So we're going to be talking about what brachos you make during the meal. Says the Mechaber Sif Aleph, Dvarim haboim b'toich hasuda, things, food items which are brought during the meal. Imheim dvarim haboim machmas hasuda, if they're considered meal type foods. You would normally have during a meal, the lafes bohemes apas, which means to accompany bread. So in those days, they would everything would be eaten with bread. Could go in bossa v'dogim u'beitzim v'yirakus u'gvina v'daisa. So it's a meat and fish and eggs and vegetables and cheese and porridge and mazonos things, u'minei meluchim, salted things, all the standard things you would have in a meal. Afilu oichlem beloy pas, even if you eat them without bread directly, ein tu'anim bracha lifneim, you don't need to make a separate bracha. The Brachos hamoitzi poitartan, the bracha of hamoitzi will cover them. V'lo lachareim, nor do you need to make a separate bracha achrena. The Brachos hamazon poitartan, because the bracha you're making on the bread, i.e. the Brachos hamazon, the benching, that will exempt the bracha achrena. V'im heim dvarim haboim sheloi machmas hasuda, but if, however, these are items which are not considered ordinarily part of the meal, you wouldn't have a meal just of these items to accompany the bread. So different types of fruits, figs and grapes and other types of fruit. If you eat them without bread, then tulim bracha lifneihem. So if you have fruit during the meal, that would require a bracha beforehand. The birchas hamoitzi eina poitartan. The bracha of hamoitzi will not cover them. The lav me'ikah sudem. It's not considered the mainstay of the meal. The einom tu'unim bracha la'achareihem. And however, they do not need the bracha afterwards. The kivin shebo b'toich hasuda, since lemaisa it's in the middle of the meal. Birchas hamazon poitartan. The benching you do at the end will exempt them. V'im b'tchilas achilas ochal haperos impas. If you had some fruit and you ate them with bread, you had a bite of bread and then you ate the fruit with it, and then at the end, ochel imayim pas, you had the fruit with bread. Afilu in bentayim ochel mehem beloy pas, even if sort of in between you ate the fruit without any bread, einam tu'nim bracha aflif nehem, then that doesn't require even a bracha before them. So in short, what is the Mechaber saying? That when you wash for a meal and bench, then you make a bracha of hamoitzi, and you don't need to make a bracha on all the items. So you've got gefilte fish, and you've got soup, and you've got your main, whatever it may be. As we know, you don't make a bracha on any of these items, not a bracha rishon, not a bracha achrona, because hamoitzi and birchas hamazon will cover them. However, things which are not considered ein derech likboya suda aleihem, not part of the meal, for example, fruit, then you make a bracha rishona, but Birchas Hamazon will cover them. That's well known. So what we're going to discuss in the Mishnah Berurah and in some of the footnotes is some of the grey areas. So for example, ice cream. Do you make a bracha on ice cream during the meal and desserts and things like that? Compote. That's quite a complicated one. Surely all fruit. So we'll see. We'll see. This and more coming up. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah lelafes b'em zapas. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sifkat Aleph, v'daisa and mazonos, like a porridge, oatmeal type of thing. Af shehi ava, even though it's very thick. Ve'enim elafes b'em zapas. You don't normally have bread with porridge or oatmeal. V'nechel b'fnei atzma, you normally eat it by itself. Mikol makom kivin shebos laspia, since it's coming to satiate. Let's say you're going for breakfast and you have a slice of bread and you have a bowl of oatmeal or porridge. It's coming to satiate you. Laspia ikasudehi v'nitfeles lapas. It's considered part of the meal and therefore it's toffel to the bread. You would not need to make a separate bracha on those things. Below pass, and even if you have these items without bread, so you have some potato or some meat or some cheese or whatever during the course of the meal without bread, then you don't need to make a separate bracha. The kivin shetomid boim and lafas hapas, because these things are ordinarily eaten with bread. When it's bolim lapas, they're considered toffel to the bread. Just interesting. In number 2, he says, "Mashma shatam shasham macholim peturim bebrachu machmas shem tefelim lapas." So the implication from the Shulchan Orach is that it's things which are normally eaten with bread. So your fish and your meat and your whatever are considered eaten with bread. But he brings the Orach HaShulchan. Orach HaShulchan costs tam noisef, an additional reason, and this is perhaps the reason which perhaps resonates more with us. כשנפטרים בברכס המויצי עצמו, מפני שהם בוים לשם אכילה וסבייה והם עיקר הסודה. That is your ikka meal. So if you were to wash and to have supper tonight with some protein, some meat or some fish and some vegetables or carbohydrates, the ikka satiation meal is that food. That's how we look at it. So that is a reason to exempt it from its own bracha, because that's part of the meal which you began by making a bracha of hamoitzi, and therefore you would not require a separate bracha on these things. Okay, Gimel, potarton. So we said the bracha of hamoitzi will pater them, will exempt the individual items from their own bracha. If you only, you make hamoitzi, just have a little bit of bread in order to exempt whatever individual brachas you're going to have. It's not so clear. If you're only just having a little bit of bread in order to exempt them, it's not so clear if that works. You didn't really want the bread, you're just doing it as a means to exempt individual brachas. Certainly if you only have less than a kazayas of bread, or perhaps you can say, that is the way of the world, to be kover sud ala pas, birchas apas potazim b'chol gavni. So you've got a bit of a suffix. Valkein kosu, to b'ofen zeh, tov yoseh shivorech al shadvarim abrocha haruya lekol achas, v'lo yochel pas klal. In such a situation, better to avoid having a little bit of bread and actually just to avoid the bread and to eat, to make individual brachas. Im loy b'Shabbos v'yontov, unless of course it's Shabbos and Yontov, the oz mitzvah lechel kazayis pas, because there you've got a mitzvah to have bread. And therefore that gives it a chashivas, and therefore whatever you have during the course of the Shabbos meal will be toffel to the challah, to the bread, and will not require a bracha. Okay. Then the Mechaber carried on and said, however, fruit of the exception, kagoin te'enim, etc., that would require a bracha rishona. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Katan Dalet, v'chein kol davar sheba rak lekinuach v'lo lahaspia. And that's true with any dessert type food, which is not there to satiate, but just to give a pleasant taste at the end of the meal. So if you look at number 7, he talks about ice cream. So do you or do you not make a bracha on ice cream during the course of a meal if you've washed, if you have it for dessert? This is number 7. You need to make a shahakal on ice cream during the meal. It's not coming to satiate, it's just a pleasant thing to eat. However, regarding like an ice lolly or something like that, it's just frozen liquid. If you look at it like a drink. Exactly. It's just frozen liquid. And you would not make a bracha on that. Etc. So therefore, according to Rav Vosner, Rav Elyashiv, Rav Shlomo Zalman, you would make a bracha on ice cream during a Suda, even though you've washed, but not on an ice lolly or something like that. Okay, we'll come back to this soon. That's Adkan, that's what we're saying. Now let's continue the Mishnah Berurah. Va'afilu hayu ha'peres, we're in the first line of Dalet. Va'afilu hayu ha'peres lefon of b'shas sheberech hamoitzi. Even if the fruit was out when you made the hamoitzi, va'afilu hayu v'shalem, you can have like a baked apple for dessert or something like that. Im gamkein im ein hapas potartan, the bread is not going to exempt them, and therefore they would require their own bracha. Given she'ein shayachim lepas. Va'afilu im bishla peres im bosam. Now sometimes you have chicken or meat which is cooked with fruit, like apricot chicken or something like that. So we'll see the conclusion in a second, but let's just get there first. Even if you cook fruit with meat, you need to make a bracha on this fruit. This is not going to be the contemporary practice, but this is what Mishnah Berurah is saying. Because the fruits are not toffel to the bossa. The Chai Adam says they are toffel. Ochein, b'sefer Yad HaKtana, says the Mishnah Berurah, that you should not make a bracha on fruit which is cooked with meat. Ela dekos of tamacha, but there's a different reason. The hechet the mavash laperes in basa, ayim shuman if it's cooked with meat or the fat or whatever, with dvash, the oisemehen tavshil, shekorin apple tzimus or whatever, apple tzimus or whatever, ma'anasim shekorin barin, nirish shekol ikarin hein boin lemazim v'lesuda, v'lo niknuach ba'alma. It's to flavor the actual meat, and therefore it's coming as part of the main part of the meal. And the Torah is tavshil b'shav tavshin shenasin milefes v'yarg. It's like a vegetable you have during the meal. She'ein tzarich levarich alehem mitam, and therefore you would not need to make a bracha on it. Or Messiah, the Lord says today sofik, to avoid any question, ksheroi tzilechol tzimus mepeiros mevushalim yikach tchila eze pricha v'yivarich alehem lohitzi yaseh. And you make a bracha if you have some plain raw fruit. Then you make a bracha on that, and that certainly covers any concern. If you haven't got such a fruit, you have a little bit of bread with it, and that would be the suggestion ein shom. Compote. This is not the same as a compote, which is really a dessert type food. Now, this is quite. There's a lot to say on this. We'll just do the two footnotes quickly. Number 10 and 11 on the next page. At the bottom of the next page. 10. He says, nowadays you have tzimus, which is basically cooked carrots and raisins. Das hagon nissim karelitz. Shehishtanu haragli achila v'unechshav k'ba machmas hasuda mamish ve'ein tzorach l'potar de brachos al prichai. So you have tzimus nowadays. He says that's considered like a vegetable you have part of the meal, and you would not make its own bracha, which is again contemporary practice. Regarding again the fruit which is cooked with meat, again it seems to be the mashmos of Mishnah Berurah that you don't really need to make a bracha on these fruits, and that seems to be what the contemporary poskim say. If you want to be yotza, l'kol hadayas, to have a bit of fruit to make a bracha on it, raw fruit, then that could be an eitzah. But I think the minhag ha'olam is not to make a bracha on it because it's there just to flavor the meat, and it's considered like a vegetable as part of the meal, etc. Now, what about compote? So look at this, number 11. With a tshuvas hanhagus. So the Mishnah Berurah had concluded that it's considered a dessert, it's not part of the meal, and you need to make a bracha on it. Says number 11 of Chuvas van Hogus, Hevi Eidus Shachovitz Chaim Chazab Midinzeh. He brings testimony that I had lunch with the Chofetz Chaim, and this is not what he did in practice. He was Chayzev who atzmoi loy birach al compote, and the Chofetz Chaim did not make a bracha on compote. For Haisif Sha'af Hagam Brisk, the brisker of loy birach al compote, ela ochre mapas. He ate it with bread. Ach, Ba'archas Rabbeinu, B'Shem Hagon Mendel Zaks, that's the grandson of the Chofetz Chaim, Sh'omna Chofetz Chaim, Sh'daita Notish Shetzorach Levarech, he said not. He said actually the Chofetz Chaim did say you should make a bracha, like he writes in the Mishnah Berurah, even though he personally did not make a bracha, the efsha, and he says, I'll tell you what the difference is. Why he writes in the Mishnah Berurah that you do make a bracha on compote, but in practice the Chofetz Chaim personally did not. And the reason is this: the Chofetz Chaim didn't eat a lot, and for him this was considered the main part of the meal. Therefore, he didn't make a bracha. But everybody else who has perhaps a larger appetite than the Chofetz Chaim, they would not make a bracha because for them it's considered like a dessert type of food. It wasn't the main part of the meal. Now, interesting. V'agon Rav Avram Gurvitz, you're at the gates of Rosh Shiva. Omar Shachovitz Chaim Biel Saboy. He explained to the Rav Avram Zayda. I'm not sure exactly who that is. Rabbi Elia was his wife Zayda. So I'm not exactly sure who he's referring to. But either way, the Rav Avram writes that his Zayda explained to him, in those days, you didn't have desserts. Right? Now it's sort of a new indulgence that we've become normalized to. And then life changed. It was quite normal to have dessert. Therefore, he held back from making a bracha. So therefore, times have changed. And the okay, so either way, there is discussion about that. The Mishnah Berurah writes very clearly that you do make a bracha on compote. There seems to be discussion about whether he did in practice or not. But if you want to be very religious about it and have some bread with it, then fine. I know that Rabbi Roberts would always have some, when he would have dessert on Shabbos, he would always have a bit of challah with it. Say that. Let's carry on. I think like the normal contemporary practice would be to make bracha on compote. I think that seems to be, but again, there is discussion about it. Okay, and certainly if there's fresh fruit there, then to make a bracha on that, and then you're certainly covered. Okay, v'chol peres. So let's go on. So we said if you would have fruit during the meal, then that would require its own bracha. Says the Mishnah Berurah Sif Kotan Hey, v'chol peres hu adin chazeres v'kishuin u'melafafonos chayin, like raw vegetables, it's snain, botzel, radish, onion. Gam kein tzorich levarach aleihen ochein im oichel. Im oichel chazeres el snain a botzel v'chadem im botzel nasin tofel a botzel v'botzel alechem. And that's contemporary practice. And if he says in number 12, we have salads and vegetables as part of the meal, and therefore nowadays you would not make a bracha on these types of things, on vegetables during a meal. Okay, continuing the Mishnah Berurah, Vayin el siman kuf samaches sif katan vav tesham nispoil in paspakis and kashaichem bem sasuda. Birchas hamazon potartom. So the fruit that you have in a meal, you would require a separate bracha rishona, but birchas hamazon will cover the bracha achrona. In birchas hamazon, follow him lesuda v'tekivin she'asid levarich al masha'achal gam ze nichlal imay. It's included in it. However, v'im b'tchilas achilasa rotzolema she'tchilas achilasa achilas oisen peres hoyim pas. If, however, you ate the fruit with bread at the outset, v'gam kavanosa hulechol imoyim pas gam achakach, and you have some bread with the fruit at the end, even though you have some fruit in the interim without any bread, you don't need to make a bracha on the fruit. Since you ate them at the beginning and end with bread, but they do not require a bracha. But that's only if it's to accompany the bread and not for dessert. Because if the fruit is brought just for dessert, because if at the end of the meal they bring some fruit or something, and you happen to be nushing some bread at the beginning of the fruit and at the end of the fruit with it, therefore the bits that you have without the bread would require a bracha because it's clearly dessert foods. If all you're eating, I remember one time, there was as a kid, as that we went to a big kiddush, and I probably nowadays I try not to do this at all, but as a kid I must have eaten a bit of the kiddush, and came home and I didn't want to eat any lunch. So my dad said, "You got to wash and have something." So I washed and I have a bit of fruit. So if the whole meal is the fruit, then that's your ikka kviya suda. V'gamle marik ikka kviya suda hoisa al peres, because then that is your meal, and therefore you would not do oz ein sorach sheichel gamle b'soif in pas dafka. V'rak kim sheischelech in pas shuv ein mevorach aleim afkshachach levorach lekula alma, because that is your meal. So therefore you would make a bracha on the fruit, which is your sole eating. So fine. So if you're washing and all your meal is an orange, you would not make a bracha on that orange because that is your lunch.
If it was dessert, other type of desserts,
then for sure you'll make a bracha. Yeah. Okay. Okay. This is going on Yud. If you eat the fruit with bread at the beginning of the end, even if you eat some fruit on its own in the meantime, you would not make a bracha. You should really try and be careful because to eat it with bread and then have a bit of fruit by themselves with pas without bread, because then some achronim say no. If you're having fruit without any bread, whether you had bread at the beginning and at the end, you need to make a bracha. If you didn't make a bracha, you are allowed to eat them. If the ikka suda was just fruit, the kula alma. Imochel pastida, which is like a meatloaf, shemula in Paris, or sorry, like an apple pie or something. Ein sorach levarich ala Paris, then it follow him like kemach. So you have apple pie, you make a bracha mazonos on it. Yeah, but you don't make a separate bracha on the fruit within the apple pie. So just to summarize, what have we said? Ice cream, it seems pretty clear that you make a bracha on that. Fruit during the meal, you make a bracha on that. Compote, the Mishnah Berurah writes, you make a bracha. There was discussion about what he personally did and a bit of discussion about that. But that seems to be the contemporary practice. Okay.
Like cake as well.